Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Plato's Stepchildren, which is episode 12 of season 3 of Star Trek The Original Series. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review every episode of Star Trek The Original Series, one episode at a time. In this video I will cover the third season episode Plato's Stepchildren. So Plato's Stepchildren is the episode where Kirk, Spock, and McCoy beam down to this planet to help give medical aid to the leader who is in dire straits. And after they heal him, they find that, this is a race of people with telekinetic powers, and they use these telekinetic powers to then hold Kirk, Spock, and McCoy hostage, and they demand that McCoy stay with them permanently, which he refuses to do. So they use their telekinetic powers to force Kirk and Spock to humiliate themselves and trying to guilt and torture them into letting McCoy stay. However, eventually Kirk finds a way to duplicate their power within them, and so they use the power to overcome them and force them to stop being so sadistic. So I gotta be honest, I was not looking forward to rewatching this episode. This was an episode I never was really that fond of. I think I might have liked it a little bit more when I was younger. But, it's one that I don't really look forward to. And it's funny because I talked about when I was reviewing the season 2, I reviewed the episode Return to Tomorrow, how that felt more like a season 3 episode. I feel like this feels more like a season 2 episode, and I mean that in the worst way possible, because it makes reference to, it's this alien world where they're referencing all this stuff from Earth's history. They're referencing Plato. They refer to themselves as Plato's stepchildren. They talk about Plato's philosophy a lot within this episode, and they wear togas and those wreaths or whatever they have in their hair, whatever those things are called, and they make Kirk and Spock, perform really old-fashioned, plays and songs like Tweedledee and Tweedledum and blah 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 blah. And so that makes me think of season 2 because they always had these alien worlds where they made all these references to Earth and it was just like Earth. And so that aspect of it is very annoying to me. And I don't know. It just also felt like a season 2 episode because it involves Kirk, Spock, and McCoy down on the planet. And that was the majority of the episode, where most episodes of season 3, I feel, take place in the Enterprise and include more of the side characters, where that seems like a typical season 2 trope of just having Kirk, Spock, and McCoy on the planet, and the planet somehow emulated Earth and Earth's history. And that's something I was not looking forward to getting back to. But also, I recall how the majority of this episode is just... it's kind of similar to the Empath, because the Empath is just Kirk, Spock, and McCoy getting tortured by these aliens for the majority of the episode. And I recall that it's pretty much the same thing here, except instead of torturing them physically, they humiliate them and make them do ridiculous things, which is also a bit more ridiculous. Because you have, outside of, the fictional reality, outside of canon, you have William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy just doing all these stupid, crazy miming bullshit. Just an excuse to do that, for Kirk to act like a horse and go, "Roar!" and for Leonard Nimoy to sing and shit like that, so it's a bit more painful to watch, because it's a bit more ridiculous. But I'll tell you what, though, when I did rewatch this episode, it wasn't as bad as I feared it would be. It wasn't as hard to get through. And I also, I started to remember a bit why I kind of liked this episode in the past. I mean, there are good aspects to it. Now, first of all, the torture scenes, the painful scenes, the, scenes where the telekinetic guys are forcing Kirk and Spock to perform, they were just as bad as I remembered, but they didn't go on for as long as I remembered, which was very merciful. That there's only two of them, and both of them do seem to drag on, but it doesn't take up the majority of the episode like I was fearing that it would. And we get a lot of other really nice stuff in this episode, like the character of Alexander, who I forgot about, who's actually a really strong character, a little person, and they never sort of they barely mention that he is a little person. Like, he brings it up because the Platonians are assholes and they mock him for it, but Kirk, Spock, and McCoy don't care, and they even talk about how out in the Federation, like, everyone, no matter their size, color, or shape, are all treated equally and all treated with respect. And that was a nice touch. And the way they portrayed Alexander as a really good person was also, and he was actually above like the Platonians. Like, when Kirk offered him the power, he refused to take it, and so that was a good character. So I enjoyed the scenes with him and him connecting with Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. I thought was really well earned. So that was a good part of it. It was actually really, really satisfying at the end when Kirk got the powers and was able to overwhelm the lead asshole guy and override his powers. Like, I didn't realize just how cathartic that was an experience for me as an audience to be like, yes, to finally see Kirk get the better after being. And basically, they're bullies. Let's call them what they are. I think this is very analogous to bullies who get wicked pleasure and who are like, they're scummy people, and they have no really self-opinion of themselves, and they're just lazy, and they just get a sadistic pleasure from humiliating others. So I do see it as a huge analogy to bullying, definitely more so than the empath, because that was more of like sociopaths who are running scientific experiments with no moral compunction, which is a different thing than here, where these were just sadistic bullies. And yes, those scenes did drag on for too long. And yes, they were absolutely ridiculous and painful to watch. I absolutely hate seeing the Kirk and Spock, singing, going, I'm Tweedledee and Tweedledum, blah, 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 blah. And, and it was worse when they brought down Uhura and Chapel and forced them to kiss, which was... I really feel like they should have gotten rid of those scenes that were really uncomfortable. Now, because I mentioned this, I have to talk about what Plato's Stepchildren is known for, most of all, why it's a sort of famous episode, and that is the interracial kiss between Kirk and Uhura. Now, it's often touted as the first interracial kiss in television, but apparently that's not necessarily true, because, and I noticed this because I was watching Elan of Troyes, and the actress who played Elan was Asian, and so when William Shatner and her had a kiss scene, that was an interracial kiss, and apparently William Shatner and that same actress had a kiss earlier in the late 50s on I think Ed Sullivan's show or something like that. So that was seen as the first interracial kiss. But apparently, if you want to be more specific, between a white and African American, there was apparently a British show that aired several years before this that featured a white actor and a black actress kissing. So, but that's British. We don't care about that in America. I don't know. But it was one of the firsts. And they definitely did. And I heard all the backstories about how they made such a big deal out of it, how the Southern networks threatened to pull Star Trek from their channels because of it, because it was a very controversial thing, and so they agreed that William Shatner and Nichelle Nichols would do one take where it was actually kissing and one take was a fake kiss, and both actors apparently went out of their way to flub and to sabotage the scene when they weren't actually kissing. To their credit, apparently William Shatner did a crazy cross-eyed look in order to make that take unusable, to force them. But then there's some controversy because the actual kiss that's in the episode, I could see it not actually being a kiss, because they and maybe it was a kiss, but they purposely did it to appease the networks. But the angle, they turn their heads, is you can't really see their lips touching. But now I'm being a bit nitpicky here, pedantic about it. It was still it's still significant, and it's still great that they had an interracial kiss in Star Trek in the time, which was seen as very controversial. But the context is not so great, because as I mentioned, this was a very, very uncomfortable scene. In fact, it is it's just a kiss. It's not sex, but it is very akin to rape. It is sexual assault, basically, in which case both participants are being sexually assaulted by these telekinetic powers who are forcing them to kiss non-consensually against their will. And they even, during that scene, they talk about how Uhura is saying she's afraid, and Kirk's trying to comfort her and be like, don't be afraid. And then she talks about, I seen you, Captain, on the bridge. It makes me, not be afraid, and you give me strength. And it's a touching scene, but it's also kind of, it's a bit sadistic, because they're talking about how they're being forced to do something that they don't want. They're being humiliated. And this, throughout the entire episode of seeing Kirk and Spock, especially Spock, what that emotionally destroys him by them forcing him to display emotions like that, and they laugh sadistically about it. It's very uncomfortable, and I think it goes on for too long. And I really do think, as much as I think it is important to have an important moment in television history that they had interracial kiss, it should have been under different circumstances. It should have been consensual. That would have helped, and two characters who actually cared about each other. They should have had a love interest for Uhura, and the person could have been white, and they could have had an interracial kiss then. That would have been important. That would have been a much better historical moment than this, what is akin to sexual assault, which is extremely uncomfortable to watch. And it goes on too long. The way they humiliate Spock, and how they force him to laugh, and they force him to cry, and they're just sitting there laughing their asses off, and look at the Vulcan, watch it, and they're even taunting it, they just. I don't know. This episode, I think, is making commentary on bullies and people who are stuck up. And it also could be a commentary on aristocrats and how they antagonize the poor while they sit on their little porches and eat grapes or whatever. But I think it's like it goes on for uncomfortably too long, and there isn't enough meat to it. In fact, as cathartic as I thought that moment was at the end of the episode where Kirk got the better of them, I kind of wanted more. I kind of wanted Kirk to like beat the fuck out of them, but then again, that would be out of character for Kirk, who is the better man. But still, it's like I think those guys they got off way too easily. After sitting there watching them like humiliate and torture them for an entire episode, and being all smug about it. Like I really think their comeuppance should have been worse. But and so the episode itself is rather simplistic. Like that's an issue I have with it. There's not much to it. The plot's basically McCoy, helps heal this guy, and they're like, okay, McCoy, you have to stay here for the rest of your life, and he says no, so they humiliate Kirk and Spock, and then finally until Kirk and Spock find a way to duplicate their powers, and they get the better of them, and they beam up. It's boom, boom, boom. It's very simple, and they drag it out for long, excruciating scenes of Kirk going, I'm Tweedledee and Tweedledum, which is, it's just painful to watch on several levels. On the level that I hate seeing William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy doing those stupid miming performances is ridiculous, and also painful to watch because our characters that we love, our heroes, are being humiliated and tortured, and there's nothing to do about it, which is very frustrating. And they're being bullied, as I said, and it gets even worse when they bring down Uhura in Chapel. So, yeah, it's painful to watch on several levels. So I get why this is one of the episodes that the BBC banned. And I think at first I was like, oh, I'm not so sure about this one. But no, I'm totally sure why they banned this. They said it was too sadistic, and they also banned the empath, which I also mentioned. I think those two episodes actually make total sense. The other two that they banned, I don't think make as much sense. One is Whom Gods Destroy, which I mentioned before. It kind of makes sense because you see, the martyr gets blown up, and they're kind of like really nonchalant about that, and so it is kind of messed up. But the other one's Miri, which I don't really get that at all. Maybe it's because a grown man Kirk's hitting on an 11-year-old. Maybe that's why. I mean, that would be a good reason. But anyway, as I talked about the character of Alexander, and I liked his resolution where he actually wanted to kill the main guy, but Kirk held him back, and Kirk's like, do you really want to be like them? You're better than them. And that was a good moment, and that it was really nice how he got to leave with Kirk. Usually there's an episode where we meet someone on the planet and they're like, oh, let me take you with you, and they're like, yeah, sure, you can come with us, but then something happens by the end of the episode. They're like, no, I want to stay here and continue the work. Well, I'm glad I didn't do that here. I'm glad that he was like, yeah, get me the fuck out of this place. Now, the other thing is, though, Kirk kind of left him with the slap on the wrist, and it was kind of like, don't try to trap any other ships again because we'll be watching you, and we're going to keep an eye out on this. And they're like, yeah, and then Kirk's like, yeah, you're probably, as soon as we leave, you're going to go right back to your old ways, but remember, we can duplicate your... we know how to defeat your powers, so we're on to you, so don't test us. And my first thought is, they're probably, going to hire mercenaries to try to duplicate the powers and make their powers even worse to try to make it so... I mean, that's probably the first thing they're going to do. I honestly think that Kirk should have put them under, put a government to oversee them, or some kind of checks and balances Like the Federation should have maybe sent them to penal colonies for their fucking torturing people, torturing Alexander for bullying him for decades. I mean, or centuries apparently. Yeah, that's the other thing I gotta mention about this episode. That this is another example, and Star Trek does this a lot, especially the original series, where their timetables are way too overbloated to be like just ridiculous and kind of nonsensical. Where they're saying that these people are 2,000 years old, and they've been on this planet for thousands of years, and Alexander's been tortured. Like, I just don't buy those timetables. That's just unfathomable. I mean, 2,000 years, like, that's before the birth of Christ. I mean, well, yeah, we're in 2022 or 2023 at the moment, but I think they said it was like 2050 or so it would be. I mean, that fucking long ago, and these people had been alive that entire time. Like, yeah, that annoys me, but, again, that's just something I gotta sort of headcanon my way out of and pretend like they're not actually saying that because it's dumb. But yeah, so anyway, that's pretty much all I gotta say about this episode. As I said, there's not much to it, so I don't have really that much more to say about it. So now let me thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. Definitely very much appreciate it. It really helps the channel to keep going. We have Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Menijester, Joel Lavals, Brian A., Alessandro Miguelcio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal Howells. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. Is extremely appreciated. So we do have a few Patreon comments for this episode. First comment is from Ricky, who says, this is one of the episodes that's regarded as the worst of TOS, and I agree that it's a bad episode, but not quite one of the worst. Like, I must admit that certain scenes like Kirk and Spock going, I'm Tweedledee, he's Tweedledum, and then Kirk acting like a horse was so bad it's good. Had that feel to it. I always laugh hysterically every time I see it, but to the point these Greek figure humanoids are pricks. They helped him with his condition, and instead of being grateful, he demands that McCoy lives out his days and take care of him. When he rightfully refuses, he punishes the crew and makes them do things against their will, which I found annoying. Speaking of which, how the hell is Spock singing when they shouldn't make them talk or sing? They shouldn't be able to make them talk or sing. Also, another redeeming factor is the dwarf character. I actually found him an interesting character, and it brought a flavor to the episode. I also found the ending a bit touching that they took him out of the environment, but the damned episodic nature makes it impossible to follow up on him. That really sucked. So in contrast to popular opinion, my rating is a 3 out of 10. I have heard that there's been a lot of hate for this episode, don't get me wrong, but I haven't necessarily heard people calling it the worst or one of the worst. I guess I've seen a couple of worst lists where it was pretty high, but most of them I don't think it's considered like that bad. But no, it's not a well-liked episode, and it is generally considered not to be good. And you also bring up a good point about how they're using their telekinetic powers to make them sing. That does seem far-fetched, and to make them talk. But yeah, the whole thing is a bit dumb. So anyway, next comment is from Maddie Jester, who says, Plato's Stepchildren has some memorable stuff, but also a bunch of nonsense. A lot is made of the kiss between Kirk and Uhura, but it's just a shame it is non-consensual and forced. That could have been done better. I like the character of Alexander, and it's great that he got a happy ending, leaving that awful planet behind. Unfortunately, there's a ton of bizarre, forced playing around that goes on for far too long. I know William Shatner loves horses, but I can't believe he enjoyed that play acting. Oh well, in the end, memorable stuff, but nothing special. This is another one of those episodes that the BBC wouldn't air for decades. I don't think it's that offensive. It's just a bit crap and boring for large parts. 4 out of 10 from me. So last comment is from Brandon Neil Howells. Who says, Plato's Stepchildren. The Platonians may have telekinesis and higher intelligence, but they're cruel, indolent, sadistic, and terminally bored. How can they call themselves a republic and have a philosopher king? I don't enjoy physical comedy at all, so this episode makes me feel very uncomfortable. Yes, the kiss, big deal. It means nothing because it's done under duress. This is the episode that should have been titled Patterns of Force. Not even Alexander can save this pile of shit. I would have made the Platonians all bleed to death. One small surprise out of 10. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Kirk was talking about the whole time about, it doesn't matter, your size. We don't even notice those things. And yet he calls up to Scotty. He's like, Scotty, I got a small surprise for you. I'm like, you just did a dumb pun at his size. You were making fun of his size just then. Even if it was unintentional. I'm surprised Alexander didn't cringe from that. But anyway. I think the point of the episode was that, it was getting that absolute power corrupts absolutely. It was saying that because anyone with those powers who were able to have so much power over everything and everyone, that they would become kind of cruel and sadistic and bored. Especially if they lived for 2,000 years, which I still, again, that's fucking stupid. But anyway, yeah, so, I mean, especially if they could die so easily that all someone has got to do is scratch them. You can't tell me that Alexander never thought to sneak up on one of them while they were sleeping. But anyway. Or, what if they were just like, got like a paper cut by accident or something. They're dead. I don't know. So I don't know. But yeah, the whole time frame thing doesn't really make sense to me. Anyway, I guess Maddie was the most generous with his rating, and I'm sort of going to also be so because my rating out of 10 is a 4 poor. I almost actually gave this a 5. I was really close to giving this a 5 because I did like the stuff with Alexander, and I did like the ending. It was very sort of cathartic. It was really when Kirk got the better of them and was able to stop, Alexander turning around, point the knife right at that guy's throat. And he was like, "Oh, Captain!" Like that. That made me cheer. That was a good moment. I was like, "Yeah, motherfucker!" But as I said, I think they actually should have gotten more come up. And so, like Brandon said, he would have made them all bleed. Mind you, bleeding is a death sentence, so that's harsh, for them. Anyway, but yeah, fuck those guys. But yeah, so I almost gave it a 5 because of the strength of that, and also because of the fact that the annoying torture scenes didn't go on for as long as I thought. It wasn't the entire episode. It was only 2 scenes, but still, the more I talked about those scenes, the more I thought about them. They still went on for way too long, and it just got really uncomfortable, especially with the forced kissing, and those guys are just such big assholes, and there just wasn't enough to this episode other than sadistic bullies being dicks. So it's not enough entertainment value there for me, even though I did those aspects that I did like of the episode. So 4 out of 10 for me, and yeah, I don't think this is one of the worst episodes of the show. I think there certainly are worse episodes, but it's definitely not good. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely not good. So that is it for my review of Plato's Stepchildren. And I will say, because I was talking before about season 3 and about how I didn't really like the first batch of episodes that much, but later in the season, I would really start to get into it. Most of those episodes that I did really like, I covered it on Patreon for my revisited. So if you're just watching my channel, you might still be, well, where's these episodes you like? Well, yeah, there was Tholian Web, which I love, Day of the Dove, and For the World is Hollow, which I think is an underrated episode. And I think I got a couple average episodes coming up, but then after that, a couple really good episodes. So I think this was sort of, there's a couple bad episodes at the start of the season. This was a hump. This episode here was the hump in the middle that's bad, but I think most of the episodes are going to be, in my opinion anyway, are going to be either okay or good until we get to those two stinkers, or three. I think there's three stinkers at the very end of the season. Yeah, three of them that are like three of the worst episodes of the entire show. But until then, most of the episodes will be decent to good. To very good, actually. There's some great ones coming up, too. And this was... Yeah, there's one that's kind of mediocre, shitty, which Mark of Gideon, which I'll get to, but yeah, most of them. But this was the one hump, because it had a batch of good episodes, and then this crap, and then we'll get more into the higher episodes of why I like season 3. But anyway, coming up next on my channel. Let me see if I can bring up the schedule here. So, where are we now? Saturday will be A Wink of an Eye, another new review public on my channel, and Monday, another TOS review with That Which Survives. And then on Wednesday, back on Patreon for another revisited for Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, an amazing episode, which I had already reviewed, so I'll be on Patreon to revisit my review for that episode. And then on Thursday, another new public review for Whom Gods Destroy, which I am so looking forward to reviewing, one of my favorite episodes. Also, please remember that next month I will be doing a top 10 best and worst Star Trek as voted by you, the viewer. So please remember to vote in those polls if you haven't already. Well, not polls, if you just leave a comment below on any one of my videos and leave your top 10 best episodes of Star Trek the Original Series and top 10 worst episodes of Star Trek the Original Series. They will be contabulated and added up all together, where I will be doing a live stream with my sister sometime in June to show the results of what the top 10 best and worst Star Trek episodes are as voted by you, the viewer. Very looking forward to that, so please be sure to participate in that. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to check out my channel as I continue to cover the original series, as well as many other Star Trek videos and many other videos and many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.